Order, order. As this is a 30-minute debate, I will call Alistair Strathern to move the motion, and then I'll call the Minister to respond. So there's no... But people can intervene on Alistair. That's the format for these. And there'll be an opportunity for the member in charge to wind up. No wind up for this one. OK, it's a 30-minute. Order, order. I call Alistair Strathern to move the motion.
Thank you, Dr HoC, and I'm very grateful for the chance to move that this House considered SEND provision in Central Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today, Dr HoC, and while I regret not being able to get more time to discuss this important topic, I'm very glad to see the keen interest from across the House evident in this room today. And I have to say, particularly grateful to see many more Labour colleagues in this room that might have had quite such a geographical interest in it prior to the election. I'd also like to start by welcoming the Minister to her new role. Now, in my admittedly rather short time as an MP before the election, her energy, her wisdom and her reassuring positivity was a real source of comfort for me in what can, let's face it, be a pretty mystifying place to navigate at times. And I have no doubt that young people right across the country will be better off for her ability to bring exactly that same warmth and drive to her new role. As a former teacher and children's lead, I'm under no illusion of the scale of some of the challenges she'll be inheriting. But I'm sure she'll agree with me in recognising that fixing SEND provision and the broken national system we're inheriting is right up there with the biggest of them. Because it's a near universally accepted truth that SEND provision right across our country at the moment simply isn't working. Indeed, the system had become so broken that by the time of the election, the Conservatives' own Education Secretary had to admit they were presiding over a system that had become lose, lose, lose. And vulnerable young people right across the country looking for the support they need to thrive at school are the ones who are losing.
Would my honourable friend give way?
Absolutely.
Thank you. When discussing SEND provision with families in Hertfordshire, the phrases that most often resonate and are spoken to me have been people describing their experience as a fight or a battle. This is a consistent pattern. Parents spend months or even years pushing the system to get the support and care their children deserve at huge personal and financial costs to their families. The fight can take many forms: securing an EHCP in the first place, finding an appropriate school, or even fighting for recognition from the council that their child has additional needs at all. There is much that must change. It is of paramount importance that we reform the system so it is no longer characterised by defensiveness, but becomes one of empathy and support, and I hope my honourable friend agrees.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I couldn't agree more, because the sad reality is my constituency in our county of Hertfordshire and Central Bedfordshire, which my constituency straddles, are far from an exception to the national challenges we're facing at the moment. Both Central Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire have got real challenges in SEND provision, which is setting down schools, families and, crucially, the young people the system is meant to wrap around. Because rather than providing that support at the earliest possible moment of need, all too often it is pitting them as adversaries against the very stakeholders that are meant to be there to support them. Happy to give way.
Right. Every constituency in this place is affected by it. Without more trained staff and facilities and enhanced funding, but does he agree that it will simply not be SEND children that are going to struggle? It will be all in that classroom. And does the honourable member agree that resources to meet the need in a long-term funding stream need to be delivered for all, because they're all affected?
I thank the honourable member, and particularly for bringing his keen interest to Hertfordshire and Central Bedfordshire today too. That forensic insight that I know he is renowned for across the House. But he is quite right, of course quite right. When one young person in the classroom, whatever their needs, is let down, the whole class is losing out. And putting that right is such a fundamental challenge, I know, for our new minister and for our new government. The Ofsted reports authorities received in 2019 and 2023 respectively across my constituency painted a damning picture of local provision and the challenges families were facing. Now, it's important to acknowledge, I think, that since the reports there have been some welcome step forwards. Increases in staff capacity are needed and welcome. Moves to boost specialist school capacity, however delayed, have to be welcomed. And the model that Hertfordshire is moving towards, a model of making everyone send everyone's business, to ensure there's a breadth of ambition for those who look after young people with additional needs right across the partnership, is a novel and noteworthy approach, and I'm sure one that will be of interest to the Minister going forwards.
I think it would
the honourable member for securing this debate and for starting this debate so well. He's right to say that there has been recent progress in the delivery of SEND in Hertfordshire, but much of that has only started since the most recent damning Ofsted report. Back in 2021, I invited the then Conservative leader of Hertfordshire County Council to attend a ministerial meeting with me to discuss the funding formula, and he declined that meeting. In 2023, the Conservative group refused to invest an extra £1 million in SEND services at Hertfordshire County Council, as the Lib Dems had proposed, and they only backtracked after that Ofsted report. And only this year, the Conservative education portfolio holder apparently decided to join the F40 campaign, but only after I had written suggesting that they do so. So I'm pleased to see that there has been some progress, but would the honourable member agree with me that Hertfordshire children have been really let down, not only by the Conservatives in government, but also the Conservatives in County Hall?
I couldn't agree more, and I think the way in which families and crucially young people in Hertfordshire have been let down typifies a challenge facing local authorities right across the country, which is in the context of a nationally failing system. How do we make sure that our local leaders remain ambitious for our young people and do not become incredibly complacent about performance that could not be justified? And I think we saw that in Hertfordshire, and heartbreakingly, I think we see it in other parts of the UK today too. But it's clear there are still, even with these early signs of improvement, significant challenges to address. Local statistics, including those published today by OTB Anglia, they bear some of the shocking challenges families and young people are still facing. It's clearly evident that far too many young people are waiting far too long for an assessment, for the support that follows that, and shamefully even for the school places that are most appropriate for their needs. Alongside that, far too many families are finding themselves having to battle an appeal system just to secure confirmation of the support their young person is clearly in need of and clearly entitled to. I'd be happy to.
For securing this debate. I must declare an interest as a Central Bedfordshire councillor, so it puts me in a somewhat an awkward position. Thank the member for securing this debate. And as my predecessor in mid-Bedfordshire, you know all too well the challenges across our constituency, and I thank you for the work that you're doing on this. It's important for all of our parents and grandparents in our constituencies that children with special needs get the right support. I absolutely want to deliver that for the people of mid-Bedfordshire, and I know there have been failures in the past, and I think we've got to move forward and find solutions. I would like to do that in a cross-party way, and I hope I will be able to work with member in Hitchin, my neighbour, to do that, and also with the Minister, and I think that's the right way to go. This has been too partisan for too long, and I think some cross-party working would be very valuable, and you have my support.
I thank the honourable member for that intervention and for his commitment to work alongside everyone in this room, be they in Central Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire, to make sure our local authorities are delivering on the improvements within their gift and to making sure we support a new government in finally getting a grip of these problems that we've inherited. But I challenge anyone faced with the statistics we've been seeing over the last few months not to run the full gauntlet of emotions, all the way from despair to anger. But for me, it's been hearing the personal stories of the young people impacted by these challenges that's truly broken my heart. Absolutely.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I mean, like many of us around this table, we've heard countless stories of families in dire frustration. For this debate alone, I received over 25 stories, each more harrowing than the other. And just to pull out one example, I'll give the example of a woman called Jane who has 2 children, both with SEND needs. One of them needs one-on-one support in order to catch up on English and maths, and yet the local authority has refused to do that. And the consequence of that is that her son is now 14 years old, and he hasn't had an academic education for 6 years. And I hope my honourable friend will agree that this is a all too regular example of the challenges that we're facing.
Absolutely. And I thank my honourable friend for drawing rightly our collective shame for the shocking way in which that young person has been let down. Because my office has been blown away by the number of young people and their families who've got in touch after our call for evidence ahead of this debate to share their own personal testimonies of the struggles they've been facing and the way it's impacted their life. As he alluded to, many children across my constituency have been waiting, having a chaotic and uncertain time waiting for school places. With some, like James, who got in touch, have been out of school for years waiting for a place. and others like Mary having secured a place only to find in the last week of the summer holidays that it had been withdrawn. Just imagine how it must feel as a child to be out of school week after week, month after month, year after year. And just imagine how it must feel as a young person to be so excited to be going to a school that's finally been allocated to you because it's right for you, to find out that the week before you were due to return, they didn't want you. It shames us all. We've heard too from parents like Sophie, who've been driven to despair by a system which they feel all too often forces them to fight every step of the way, just to secure the very basics of support that their young person needs, often having to sink thousands of pounds they can barely afford into prior diagnosis, representation and support after losing complete faith that local provision will be able to meet their needs. We've also heard too devastating stories from young people pushed to the brink by the lack of appropriate support, with stories of those whose mental health has spiralled to the point so many thought they could no longer be in day-to-day education. And devastatingly, and particularly heartbreakingly, we heard from the parents of Alice, who, after feeling isolated and alienated by the delays to getting the right support in place at school, felt she had no option available left to her other than to attempt to take her own life. What more damning indictment of our failure could there be? I know that not one person in this room will consider any of these stories acceptable, and I want to reassure every young person and their family experiencing the sharp end of a failing system in my constituency that me and my office never will. It's truly impossible to do justice to all of the over 100 stories that we received in the time we have available to us today. But each and every one of you who have reached out, each and every one of you who is struggling at the moment, I want you to be assured that I will carry with me the pain and the urgency of your testimony every day as I champion the changes we need to see locally and here in Parliament. And to those elsewhere, whether in Central Bedfordshire or Hertfordshire, looking around the room, I can see you're not going to be short of advocates either. Because we all recognise that every day a child lacks the support they need to thrive at school is a stage potential that will forever have been wasted. And when that support is lacking, as the Honourable Member for Strangford pointed out, everyone is losing. Every time a parent has had to give up work to take on extra responsibilities, where the state has fallen short on our promise to them, is a moment where their career and their whole family's lives has been forever narrowed by our system's failure. And every child who's given up hope that the system can ever work for them at all, who's been turning to despair or even worse, is a child who we've all failed collectively to do right by. I'm sure, and I hope colleagues here today will welcome Labour's commitment to make sure we finally put in place some of the actions needed to address this issue. Early actions already in this Parliament to bring consideration of SEND back alongside schools, announcing potential reform of Ofsted to improve the approach to assessing inclusion, particularly around admissions, and ensuring we have an underlying commitment to a community-wide, reinvigorated approach to SEND, all to me suggest we finally have a government that understands the nature of the challenge we're dealing with. But as we move forward to tackling this system, I want to make sure our approach learns from some of the failings that are so evident across the stories we've heard locally. It's clear our local systems are allowed to get to a truly dire place before action was prompted by Ofsted. As the Honourable Member for St Albans pointed out, we have to do better. We have to make sure our local partnerships are held accountable for high ambitions for all of our young people, regardless of the national context. That can never be an excuse for choosing to let people down day after day. It's also clear in both areas that academisation has added to fragmentation locally, and that we need to think through how we can resolve some of the challenges of a truly inclusive admission system when the partnerships don't currently have the powers they need to compel all local stakeholders and all local schools to play their part. And there'll be an important role, I'm sure, for Ofsted there too, to then hold schools accountable for delivering on their approach to inclusion. In Central Bedfordshire, some of the challenges have been particularly exacerbated by the issues in the transition from a 3 to 2 tier system. This stalled transition has delayed the release of school capital sites that's so important to be able to invest in localised specialist provision, meaning that sites that have been allocated and earmarked for much needed special schools remain used in mainstream education much longer than originally intended. And I'd welcome thoughts from the DfE about how they can potentially add support to Central Bedfordshire's efforts to finally get this transition over the line. And more fundamentally, there's a big underlying question about how we can make sure the funding formula is about allocating resource to match need right across our country, and particularly in the two areas that I'm talking about today, truly match the evidence need in place today and the challenges of doing that in a rural context. And I think it's particularly noteworthy that in spite of all of the challenges we've been talking about here, Hertfordshire still has one of the lowest high needs block allocations in the country. But even all the funding in the world wouldn't make a difference without a trained workforce to deliver. It's clear that alongside thinking through how we best support local authorities, how we best support local partnerships to answer these questions, we need a workforce strategy to ensure that we're properly addressing the issues that we've been talking about. From educational psychologists to speech and language therapists, we just don't have the trained professionals to take on some of these vacancies currently. And locally in our patch, these challenges are exacerbated by the fact that our near London context makes it even harder to recruit and retain for these specialties. Thinking through how we can make sure we've got a national workforce strategy, but with an eye to the specific challenges of outer London and near London authorities, is going to be an important part of truly resolving the system for the young people that we've been talking to today. And crucially, how we make sure that the heartbreaking stories of families, their children, and the painful misery of the appeal system can finally be brought to an end. All too often, cases are appealed at great cost to everyone involved. Both Central Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire spend eye-watering amounts fighting appeals only to concede and often lose. How can we possibly see this as a good use of anyone's time and resource? We need to think carefully through how we can reform the system to ensure incentives are there in the right place to address need at the earliest opportunity, and mediation is used robustly, fully, in good faith and exhausted to make sure that expensive appeals are only necessary as a last resort rather than the default for managing demand in a broken system. Now, I know, Dr HoC, that this government is very aware of the challenges it's inheriting. Along with so many others, SEND provision will be one that it falls to this new government to put right. And I want to thank the Minister in advance for the leadership I know she will show on this issue. And I want to thank colleagues from across the House too for being here today. And I really, whatever party, whatever seat, I look forward to working with all of you to hold our local partnerships to account, to deliver on what is within their gift, and to work with our new Minister nationally to deliver on Labour's commitments to finally get on top of SEND provision. But most of all, yes.
Thank you very much, and I thank the member for giving way. And I'd just like to declare an interest as a Hertfordshire County Councillor, and it's an honour to speak under your chairmanship. High needs funding is in Hertfordshire one of the lowest in the country, the third lowest funding. So I know he's mentioned within his speech the very important need to increase that funding. Will he join with us across party to lobby the new government in increasing that funding, because Hertfordshire rightly deserves the right funding in place to deal with the SEND issues that we need to increase capacity, which will help us get an increased workforce to deal with some of the capacity issues we've got in Hertfordshire. And I'd just like to place on record, this issue is very important to me. I have two close family members, a brother and a sister, who have special educational needs. So I've grown up in a family on the front line. So I'm pleased to speak in this debate today, and I want to congratulate him on getting time to discuss this very important issue.
I thank the Honourable Member for that intervention and for sharing the personal aspect of his story too. I think absolutely in me he will find an ally in making sure we get a funding formula that truly meets the needs of every authority, particularly our authorities, of course, going forwards. And I think many other Honourable Members have pointed out some of the challenges of where the current formula is indexed at a point where it was pretty clear that the local authority wasn't managing the full use of that budget to deploy and meet the very real needs that were already starting to build up underneath the surface. But finally, I just want to thank every young person, every parent, every teacher who is battling to do their absolute best across those two areas in a system that just is not set up to back them to succeed. A system that is letting down children with additional needs is a system that is letting down children full stop, and it simply should not be a system that any of us tolerate any longer.
Thank you, Dr HoC. I'd love to thank my honourable friend, the member for Hitchin, for securing this debate on such a vital issue for all of our residents. For the last few weeks, I've been running an online campaign to encourage residents in my constituency of Stevenage to tell me their SEND provision stories. Among them, one constituent told me, despite constant concerns raised and referrals, I was left undiagnosed, unmonitored and untreated for ASC1 and ADHD for over 2 decades. In retrospect, I can see that many of the difficult experiences I had throughout school could have been so different. A local councillor told me, my constituent has a 10-year-old son with significant cognitive delay. He was placed in a comprehensive school with no SEND support capacity while stuck on a 90-child waiting list for a place at a suitable SEND school. And a mother told me, my son with special needs was excluded before we were able to complete his EHCP application, then sent to a school an hour and a half away as the nearest option with capacity to meet his needs. Unable to cope with the daily taxis, we were then refused funding for a transition to a new school. He has been left without formal education for 5 years. I've been unable to make any contact to get help for years. These harrowing accounts tell a clear story. The diagnosis and EHCP process is hard to navigate and too slow. It's easy to see these as just another piece of complex casework. It's much more than that. There is clearly a systemic problem in Hertfordshire, as per the recent Ofsted and CQC report had found. Every case is about the future of a child who deserves an education just as much as anyone else. And all children are impacted by failure to provide SEND support to those who need it. I hope these remarks have added weight to the importance of fixing the fundamental flaws in SEND services to secure a dignified future for all affected. We must do better. I am hopeful that Hertfordshire County Council can turn things around, and I would ask the Minister to consider a fairer funding settlement for our county so as to help deliver the support our young people need. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to serve under you as chair today, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Hitchin for securing this debate on this incredibly important subject and for his excellent speech setting out in such great detail the challenges that far too many face in his local area. And I know he is a champion for children and families in his constituency and shares this government's vision to break down the barriers to opportunity, to ensure all children receive the best start in life and the right support to succeed in their education and to lead happy, healthy and productive lives. And I thank him for his kind words at the opening of his speech. And I can reassure him that improving the special educational needs and disabilities system across this country is a priority for this government. And that includes improving services for children and young people with SEND in Central Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire. Because over 1.6 million children and young people in England have special educational needs. And we know that for too long, as honourable members across both sides of this debate today have set out, have been let down by a system that is not working. The former Secretary of State for Education said the system was lose, 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 and she was right. And far too many families have been left failed. Despite high needs funding for children and young people with complex special educational needs and disabilities rising to higher and higher levels, confidence in the SEND system is low, tribunal rates are increasing, and there are increasingly long waits for support. Far too many children with special educational needs fall behind their peers, and they do not reach the fundamental expected level in reading, writing, and maths, and just 1 in 4 pupils achieve the expected standard at the end of primary school. Families are struggling to get their child the support they need, and more importantly, that they deserve, and it really must change. After years of parents feeling frustrated, a reform programme that has constantly been delayed, and time again, we've seen a lack of trust in the system. This government wants to be honest with families. We are committed to improving inclusivity and expertise in mainstream schools, as well as ensuring special schools can cater to those with the most complex needs. Fundamentally, we want to restore parents' trust that their child will get the support that they need to flourish. And we know that effective early identification and intervention can reduce the impact that a special educational need or disability may have in the long term. And that's why in July 2024, the government announced that the funded support for 11,100 schools registered for the Nuffield Early Language Intervention programme would continue for the year 24 to 25, because we know that extra support with speech and language is so important to help young people find their voice. But there are no quick fixes for these deep-rooted issues. After 14 years, I can barely see a system as broken, one in such desperate need of reform, one that is so important that we fix. And that's why I welcome the comments from the honourable members for Mid-Bedfordshire and Stevenage that recognise that this is an inherited challenge that so many of us in this House want to see addressed. But let me be clear, we have started work already. Fixing our SEND system is a priority for this department. But I have to be clear as well, it will take time. And government cannot do it alone. We will work with the sector who are essential and valued partners to ensuring that our approach is fully planned and delivered, together with parents, schools, councils and expert staff who we know and who the Honourable Member quite rightly said go above and beyond to support our children. We're acting as quickly as we can to respond to the cost pressures in the SEND system, because we know they're causing real financial problems in some local authorities, including in Hertfordshire and Central Bedfordshire. Before the parliamentary recess, we announced a new core schools budget grant, which will provide special and alternative provision schools with over £140 million of extra funding this financial year, 2024 to 25, to help with the extra costs of the Teachers' Pay Award and the outcome of the negotiations for support staff as well. And this is in addition to the high needs funding allocations for children and young people with complex special educational needs and disabilities. The Department for Education budgets haven't yet been set for 25 to 26, and how much high needs funding is distributed to local authorities, schools and colleges next year will depend on this next stage of the government spending review, and it's due to be announced at the end of October. We are very much in listening mode to the challenges that are being set out today, but it does mean that next year's allocations of high needs funding haven't been published to the normal timescales, but we are working across government to announce next year's funding allocations for Hertfordshire, Central Bedfordshire and other local authorities as soon as we possibly can. We are acutely aware of the financial pressures that local authorities are facing, not just because of supporting the needs of young people with complex needs, but also those financial pressures they are facing as a whole, that we have inherited with the economic climate and the challenges around that. So resolving these problems will not be quick, it will not be easy, and I think it's important that we take the time to develop long-term solutions to ensure that we take a long-term approach to tackling these issues, and I very much welcome the opportunity to hear the thoughts of members on how we do that together as we go forward. Because we need to make sure we get better outcomes from our investment for young people. It's important that we have a fair education funding system that directs that funding to where it is needed and where it can make the most impact as well. And one aspect of that is the national funding formula and the way the allocated high needs funding to local authorities is used. And we need to take time, if there are any changes to that formula, to make sure we consider the impact of that and we get it right. As we know, Ofsted and the Care Quality Commission jointly inspected local area SEND. They jointly inspect local area SEND provision, and these inspections enable the department to intervene in areas of significant concern and work with local authorities and professional advisors to address where there are weaknesses. And I'm very concerned that the SEND inspections in Central Bedfordshire in November 2019 and in Hertfordshire in July 23 found significant concerns about the experiences and outcomes of children with special educational needs and disabilities. Ofsted and the CQC revisited Central Bedfordshire in July 22, found that 3 of the 6 initial areas of weakness had improved. Central Bedfordshire produced an accelerated progress plan to address the remaining areas of weakness, and the department is continuing to monitor these. The issues raised in the inspection reports are serious. The government needs to be confident that the local area in Central Bedfordshire and the local area partnership in Hertfordshire are taking the right actions to secure rapid and sustainable improvement. We work alongside NHS advisors, NHS England advisors, meet every 6 months with local leaders and representatives from schools and colleges, and we have a parent-carer forum to review and challenge progress on the accelerated progress plan. In Hertfordshire, the local area appointed Dame Christine Lenehan to chair an independent board to bring about rapid improvement. DfE officials, an NHS England advisor and SEND advisor, they meet monthly with local leaders and Dame Christine to scrutinise and challenge the improvement plan. It's so important that this work is undertaken, and I'm conscious of time, and I want to make sure that I do justice to the honourable member's excellent speech. But I fear I will not have the time to address all of the concerns that he raised, which in his very excellent speech that went into quite some detail. So I'll be very keen to be able to write to him with some more of the details of the work that is ongoing to make sure that many of the issues that he has addressed are tackled, and the Department and reassure him that the Department for Education is working very closely to make sure that these improvement programmes are delivered. Because I want to thank him again for bringing this matter forward. The SEND outcomes in his local area and right across this country is an issue that we all care passionately about. We recognise the system needs to improve. We recognise the hardship that too many families are facing, and we are determined that this will change. And I want to thank, like he did, everyone that's working in this SEND system to deliver better outcomes for all of our children across the country.